Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. It's my pleasure. I'm Danielle Savory, and I am so thrilled to have this interview shared with all of my viewers. So some of you may not have noticed or even paid attention to the fact that I rarely, if ever, and by if ever, I've never interviewed a man before on the podcast other than my husband, which was episode number 100. But today you are in for a treat. This is the first ever man interview outside of my husband on the It's My Pleasure podcast. So Evan Katz became the world's first dating coach back in 2003, and he specializes in really helping smart and successful women create lasting love. He is the author of 4 books, and his podcast has over 2 million downloads, and he's been featured in a number of outlets. Beyond that, though, what you're going to love about this episode is that we really get deep into exploring the dynamics of gender roles in dating relationships, the importance of emotional intelligence, and the significance of relying on intuition in seeking a compatible partner. We cover so many topics in this short episode, and I really think that you're going to love some of the takeaways, whether you're in the dating world or not, being able to understand how sometimes women and men can have miscommunication when it comes to pleasure, when it comes to needs, wants, and sexuality, and how to understand, even if you are in a long-term partnership, when to start questioning, are we settling? Is this really what we want? Is this something that still lights us up? So to understand when we need to be compromising compared to when we need to be settling. So enjoy this interview that I did with Evan, and I can't wait to hear what you think about it later. Okay, welcome, Evan. I'm so happy to have you on. It's my pleasure today. How's it going?
I'm wonderful. I'm just really glad to be here.
Yay, I love it. So I don't know if you know this, but you're actually the first man I have ever had on It's My Pleasure podcast other than my husband.
I think that's very flattering. To be the first guy to say I'm the Jackie Robinson of this podcast, yes. Breaking new ground. And yes. I hope to live up to your husband's high standards.
Well, that was a little insight into like our personal world and really asking him, like, what's it like dating a sex coach? Like, let's get real honest and real about it. Sure. But you are coming on as an expert and you are a dating and love coach. So I'd love to hear just a little bit of background. How did you get into this, especially because you're a dating coach for women? And right. You are a man. So I want to hear a little bit about how you ended up exactly where you are now.
I don't know that my personal story is any more interesting than anybody else's, but people come into careers probably like yours if I learned your personal origin story, because there's a special interest. There's something that's important that's driving you there, even if you don't know this is where you're going to end up. So for me, I always wanted to be myself for a living. Now, you've gotten to know me in 5 minutes, but I've always just wanted to be myself. I thought there was some unique value to that. So I didn't want to be a lawyer. I canceled my LSATs after college, and I came out to Los Angeles to be a screenwriter. And I got agents and managers, and I did everything but make money. And so suddenly I'm 30 and I've got nothing. And I'm in film school. I got to get a job. And I get a job answering phones at an online dating company. And this is
goodness.
2003.
Yeah.
And so it's a job. It pays the bills. It's not much money. Getting yelled at by strangers on the phone in customer service, and online dating is around. It's pretty big, but it's still under the radar. People aren't admitting that they're doing it.
Right, right.
And so I was a writer. What did I do? I wrote a book about online dating. And unlike my Hollywood career, the book went well.
Nice.
And so it was called I Can't Believe I'm Buying This Book, A Common Sense Guide to Successful Internet Dating.
Yeah.
And suddenly I was in Time Magazine and on CNN and in USA Today. And I was the same, film school guy who couldn't get a gig in Hollywood. Yeah. And so I hung out a shingle writing people's online dating profiles. I was a writer, taking my few skill sets. I was dating online. I was doing well. Yeah. So I started writing dating profiles for a website that I built called eCyrano.com. And people would get their new profile. They'd be like, oh my God, this is great. I'm getting all this attention. What do I do now? I don't know. You go online and flirt. I don't know how to flirt. Okay, well, let's log into Match.com and So one thing leads to another. And the next thing you know, I was a dating coach. And there was no such thing as a dating coach. I was like the first guy
Yeah. Yeah.
to be a dating coach. Now there's a billion people who do what I do. And after 5 years of dating coaching, I realized 80% of my clients that I didn't ask for were women.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Men need help. Women ask for help.
Mm. Yeah.
And then I realized there was something really unique about being a man who helps women make better choices with men. If I'm a man and I need help with women, I'm probably asking a woman.
Yeah. I love that. And I want to go back to what you just said about this: men need help and women ask for help. Why do you think that is?
I don't know that I can get into the deep weeds of the nature nurture argument.
Yeah.
Right. But I think societally, we can observe that men often have an undeserved arrogance
Yeah.
and women have an undeserved lack of confidence. And again, I'll deal with broad gender stereotypes. I don't want to be,
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't want to be afraid of it. Couple breaks up. She's like, oh my God, what did I do wrong? How could I fix this? Guy's like, crazy bitch.
Yeah.
Right. I'm not endorsing that view. Right.
Right.
But like, that's a very typical way for people to process breakups. Right. Men
Yeah.
don't do as much looking in the mirror, unfortunately. And so women, because they're more likely to take responsibility, look inward, do personal growth, go to therapy, take antidepressants. There's women are just more on top of that kind of stuff, and guys, on the whole, aren't. The world's changed for the better, but there's no point in running a business for people who are not asking for help.
No, I really love that you bring that up because I think it comes up so often, even just in my line of work, and coaching women. It's like, if anything's going wrong, then it automatically is like, I must be doing something wrong, or maybe it's my body, or maybe it's the way that I'm approaching things, and it really is like immediately comes back to, whether it's a self-worth thing or a self-deservedness thing or a confidence thing, but it's a me, I am the problem.
Right.
Yeah. So even kind of going off of that line, like how, one of the things I was seeing you talk about in some of your material is this idea of, settling versus compromise, right? And I think that plays right into when women, especially, have this experience of not feeling really confident in their past relationships or not feeling super secure about how they're dating or they're going on, and they end up settling. So how do you speak to this subject of like really asking yourself, like, am I settling? And what does that look like? And then I'd love to get into talking more about what it looks like to like compromise in a relationship where it doesn't look the same as settling.
Oh, I have thoughts.
Yes, I want to hear
No,
all of them.
no, it's a really great question, and it's the question, right? Like this is the sort of quintessential. How do I know if I'm making the right decision? Question.
Yeah.
And people historically have not made the right decisions, and so women who are, and I don't like to use the terminology because it offends, but there were the women who were in the 95th percentile of everything and
Mhm.
can't seem to find a guy who's good enough for them,
Yeah.
right? And we don't like to use the word picky, but they're having a hard time finding a man of their caliber, right?
Right.
Sometimes we need to get them to open up to guys over here. And then there's people on the other end who spent their whole life settling for miserable relationships and have bent
Mhm.
over backwards to please men and have never been pleased themselves. And we need to give them more confidence to raise their standards for men,
Yeah.
right? There's this lane where there are happy marriages, right? We know happy marriages. I know happy marriages. I have one. I've helped other people have them.
Yeah.
So the difference between settling and compromising is twofold. Number one, it's how you feel about it.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds kind of wishy-washy, but you settle your way into misery. You
Mm-hmm.
compromise your way into happiness. So they both involve trade-offs,
Yeah.
right? Your job is a trade-off. Your home is a trade-off. Your friends and family are a trade-off. The city you live in is a trade-off. There's good things. There's bad things. You make peace with those things, and you're like, I like my home. I like my city. I like my job. It's good enough.
Yeah.
We have a harder time doing that with love. We
Yeah.
want all good things and no bad things,
Right. Right.
right? So how you feel about your compromise is the determination of whether it's a good compromise. If
Mm-hmm.
you're in a relationship and you're unhappy, I think you compromise too much.
Yeah. Yeah.
right? But all married couples compromise.
Yeah.
So then we get to the question of what should we compromise on,
Yeah.
right? And in my opinion, it's not a fact. My opinion is that people tend to compromise on the wrong things
Mm.
and then wonder, why is this so hard? Why are relationships so hard?
Yeah. Yeah. Say more about that.
No. We go online,
Mhm.
especially modern dating apps. What do people look for? And again, I'm not saying it's right or wrong. There's no value judgment. Most of my clients, height, weight, age, education, income, status,
Mhm. Yeah.
right? All of those are attractive. Not saying you should be with someone who is stupid and ugly and poor. When people hear this,
Yeah.
they think, oh my God,
Yeah.
they're telling me to give up all standards. Not what I'm saying at all.
Right.
But if you go online and you just look for the most impressive man that everybody else is looking for too,
Yeah.
it's got a lot of options, and you can end up with him, and you have ended up with him. What did you compromise?
Mm.
Generally, character,
Mm.
kindness, consistency,
Mm.
communication, commitment. And if you're missing any one of those 5 things, you're not going to have a happy relationship.
Yeah.
You could
I
have
love
a happy relationship with a 5'9" guy. You can't have a happy relationship with a top chef, supermodel, Rhodes Scholar who cheats on you.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's so important. And it's really like kind of this debate of like what somebody looks like on paper, versus the feeling, the experience that you have with them, the safety that you experience with them. I think that's another thing that I find with so many women is like, what does your nervous system feel like around this person? And so oftentimes if we just shoot for these like on paper check mark, like 6'3", successful, handsome, all of that stuff. You get around them and you're wondering why you're not being yourself. And it's because your nervous system doesn't feel safe. Like
I
you actually don't
love
feel safe in your body.
I love that you said that. And I love that there's other experts whose message completely dovetails with my message and how we could arrive at the same
Yeah.
conclusions from different paths. I always say the mark of a successful relationship is the lack of anxiety,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And that the core thing you should be feeling in a relationship is safe, heard, and understood,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so you could have, the best guy on paper and be missing those, and you could have a guy who your friends wouldn't bat an eye at, and he can make you happier than anybody you've ever imagined. But most people don't give that person a chance because he doesn't look the part of what we think we're attracted to or what we deserve. And then, as you know, if you're a sex coach, sometimes what we're attracted to isn't even healthy for us. It's just what
Right.
we're attracted to.
Right, right. Absolutely. It just reminds me of like my own personal experience when I first started dating my husband. I had gotten out of this long relationship with this guy that, on paper, it was like my parents loved. It was so perfect, like get along with the family, like all of those, like check, check, check. And my husband like made me laugh and made me feel really good and safe, and nobody understood. Like nobody got it. And just really having to trust that instinct. And now, like 22 years later, like I'm like, well, see, I told you, like this is really the person for me.
That makes me so happy.
Yeah.
Because it validates my own experience,
Yeah.
right? Everybody's looking for the lightning bolt, the you just know, right? Sort of cease critical thinking.
Yeah.
And when I ask people, and I don't, there's always some stories. The second I met John, I knew he was the one, and they last for 40 years. What you lose sight of is there's 1,000 people who thought they met the one and they were wrong.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, when I was dating the other guy, I was like, well, he probably is the one because
Right.
he checked out in so many ways. And so, there is that trial and error period where you have to get into the relationship and find out. So I'd love to go back to settling because, one of the things that I find isn't so much like women wouldn't consider they're actually settling. Like it seems like a good deal. And I think because of what we've been like, especially in this generation and what we've seen represented, whether it's with our mothers or our aunties or our grandmothers, it does feel like I should be happy here. Like he provides for me. He does that, and now we do have a lot of different expectations. We do have a lot of different standards. We're having a lot more, intense, real conversations that we've been needing to have a lot of time for things like mental load and emotional load and meetings. So how how do we understand or really highlight like what settling even looks like for women when the representation for a good relationship hasn't necessarily been a happy or a healthy one?
That's I love your questions. You're good at this.
Oh, thanks.
Sure, my pleasure. It's so engaging to be with someone who puts such great thought into her questions. It doesn't happen all the time. So compliments to you.
Well, that just came from my head just now. So,
That's okay. Compliments to you. Um, uh, there are two relatively seminal books on this topic. One was considered very controversial, but I don't think it's that controversial. The other one wasn't as popularly read, but it's a little bit more academic. The
mm,
first book is called "Marry Him: The Case for
mhm,
Settling for Mr. Goodenough" by Lori Gottlieb,
yeah. I
a
love
good
Lori. Yeah.
who's a friend of mine. I coached her while she was writing the book, so every other chapter
Yeah.
is called like Mondays with Evan,
Love it.
and she talked about being a Stanford, Yale, NPR superstar writing for television who probably should have compromised and instead of holding out for a 10, married an 8 when she was 31.
Yeah.
She ended up having a child by herself and raised him alone, and it was lonely. And she looks sort of back on what perhaps she could have done differently. And she got, we talked about this prior to getting on the air. She got attacked by the feminist blogosphere.
Hmm.
You never settle. That's the you're part of the problem.
Right.
And she wasn't obviously saying to settle. She was saying compromise on the right things, the same things you and I are talking
Yeah.
about.
Yeah.
But that became really controversial. The most seminal book on this subject is Eli Finkel. Um, I interviewed him on my podcast once upon a time. It's called The All or Nothing Marriage. And he talks about Mount Maslow, basically our hierarchy of needs,
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
right? And it used to be the nature of marriage changed over time. It used to be let's have 8 kids so they could work on our farm and 5 of them will live and we're just trying to survive. And then in the 20th century, the marriage model moved to something more stability. We're going to give our kids a better life. We're going to buy a tiny suburban home and we're going to work hard at thankless jobs and we're going to get the gold watch and retire after 40 years. And
Yep.
she's going to take care of him and she's going to put her ambitions aside. And it was stability, but there wasn't that much happiness.
Hmm. Yep.
Right. And now where we are, we've gone so far up Mount Maslow that we reach eat, pray, love proportions.
Hmm.
Right. You don't need a man. You need a champion.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's where we get into some sticky territory. It's not just that he's a nice guy who listens to you, who validates you, who makes a decent living, who's respectful, who makes you laugh. He also has to be an animal activist.
Mm-hmm.
He also has to run triathlons. He also has to be a vegan. He also has to vote the same way you do and have the same passion for it. And now it's sort of a level of narcissism where we can't accept differences. We need to date our clone.
Yeah.
And that's what sort of made dating a little bit more impossible when we find things that shouldn't be deal breakers to become deal breakers, in my opinion.
Right. Right. And I think it's up to everybody to decide what those deal breakers are, as you say, is like really just thinking through like what are the deal breakers, because I see that all the time, especially I work with a lot of long-term couples, people that have been in relationships for 10, 20, 30 years and still asking that question, like, is this just a preference or is this a deal breaker? Like, is this something that we can't even open our minds around, which I think is so important to continuously ask ourselves, because it can change, especially when you started dating somebody maybe in your 20s or 30s and you're a completely different person in your 50s.
Yeah. People do have to evolve together over time. That's a different
Yeah.
thing. And
Yeah.
people's needs are going to change when they're 30 and when they're 50 and when they're 70. I
Yeah.
think for single people who are asking these questions, I always ask people to say, if this person you're with doesn't change at all,
Mhm.
let's assume they're fixed.
Yeah.
Could you be happy in the status quo as things are now? Not he's got such great potential. Sometimes we're so great. Like when we're not fighting, it's really amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's really getting more down to like, if nothing changed, could you do this forever? It's a
Yeah.
40-year car ride without a radio. You better be in that car with your best friend. You better like that person, respect that person, laugh with that person, be able to resolve conflict with that person.
Yeah.
Right. It shouldn't be such a roller coaster. It should be my metric is very different than I think most coaches or therapists who say, relationships take work. I work backwards. I say good relationships should be fundamentally easy, and they take effort, like a garden that you water.
Yeah.
But it shouldn't feel like work. If it's work, it might be the wrong relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'd love to pause there a little bit, because I think it's good to make a distinction between work and effort. And a
Yes.
lot of times, especially when I am coaching somebody that's dating or in a newer relationship, a lot of the effort or the work that I'm working on with this woman is from their own perspective and their own self-awareness. Like sometimes it's internal work that we need to be doing, or healing work in order to. But I'm curious, I want to hear your perspective of like, what do you really mean by like work versus effort? And when we really do want to pay attention, like, is it just an easy button? Are we just coasting along? Or is this time really for me to pause and see maybe where some of my own habitual patterns are showing up in this relationship that are keeping me from being able to be available to this person I really like?
Yeah, I mean, how you show up in a relationship often dictates how someone shows up for you. That's tricky. It's very easy to get into the blame game. Marriages could go through cycles and things like that. I don't want to stigmatize the fact that people are going to have some struggles, personal struggles, and relationship struggles. I think when you're operating from a place of goodwill and faith, right? And if you married well, it's a Venn diagram. There's just a big overlap. My wife and I couldn't be more different, background wise, right? I'm East Coast Jewish, liberal, intellectual, that kind of guy, and she comes from, her dad listened to Rush Limbaugh, military family and God family country, San Diego. Couldn't have more different backgrounds. Together, we don't fight about very much. We agree with how we socialize, how we spend money, our respective libidos, the taste we have in friends, saving versus spending. Most of it has just naturally aligned. So when something does come up where there's a conflict a conflict that's not easy to resolve, there's so much overlap and goodwill that we are able to work around that. And that's where the effort comes in. Work is when we're trying to put Humpty Dumpty back together again, where it's like, this isn't working, and it's more strain. It's more draining than uplifting. So I think that's the thing. And you really got to pay attention to your emotions. My relationship is uplifting. It doesn't mean we don't have problems, but it means she's still my safe place to land, and vice versa. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. I love that. And, coming back to, this little bit of this conversation of having all these expectations, right? Like having, like, they have to meet all of these standards, all of these things, how we've really shifted into, not settling, like you deserve everything. What is the difference between seeing potential in someone? Like there are, I think things are changing, but there are a lot of men who have not educated themselves on some of the shifts that are going on in our society, or mental load, or the way that there might be equality, in the relationship, in the house. These are very long-term, like passed down generational sorts of ways of approaching a relationship. Like, when do you think that you give an opportunity to somebody to like really open up and be like, wait a minute, I see that I actually have, got this from my dad, or got this from my grandfather, got this from society in general, and give them a chance to step up and, meet you in more of this equal relationship, versus it just being like, this isn't worth it. I don't want to look into the potential to wait for them.
That's a really tough question. And I suspect you're not going to like my answer, but not gonna stop me.
Yeah.
Everybody who does coaching therapy has their belief system, their anecdotes, their catchphrases that they use. Right?
Yeah.
One of mine is, you can't have a relationship with someone dependent upon them changing for you.
Yeah.
Which is not to say that it's impossible for people to change, because we know it's not.
Right.
But they have to want to change by their own volition, not because you tell them to change.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right. So in this fictional relationship, if you're the woman and I'm the man,
Yeah.
and I'm taking this old school role. We both have the same job. That at home I put my feet up and you run around to do all the housework and child rearing.
Yeah.
Right. Now again, we wouldn't get that far in the relationship if that was the case. But right.
Yeah.
So you're the CEO. This is again another one of my course, Love You. That's the
Yeah.
central metaphor. Women are the CEOs because I'm a coach for women. Men are the interns applying for a job. So what you have to do as a CEO is set the expectations of what the job is,
Mm-hmm.
not negotiable.
Yeah.
Right? If we're going to be together, this is what I need from you.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It may not come naturally to you, but this is what my needs are.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And it could be anything. When my wife was dating me, she's like, I'm an entrepreneur, so I work different hours. She'd get out at 5 and she'd call me on the phone. And I'd be like, "Rrr." I was not ready to talk at 5. She's like, here's what I need from you. Right? You're my boyfriend. I need to feel a connection with you every day. So even if you can't talk to me at 5, just give me a call before you go to sleep so I could feel connected to you. Could you do that for me?
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, being the stupid guy. Okay, I could do that. And I loved it. Every day, it wasn't a text. Every day I talked to her on the phone and I thought I talked to her for 5 minutes and we talked for an hour.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And she set the tone for me.
Mm-hmm.
If I failed to do that, you know what she should do? Dump me.
Mm-hmm.
So you set expectations, you show someone how to please you. And if they don't please you, you have to have the courage to let them go instead of potential, potential, potential. And the next thing you know, you're married, have 2 kids with the guy that you realized didn't want the equal role.
Yeah. 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 So, yeah. And I think this brings us to a really good point, because I think there is this conversation of needs, right? Needs versus wants. And I do think that's something that comes up a lot in, I'm sure your conversations with your clients, my conversations with my clients. One of the things that I really stand on is like, how many needs can we meet ourselves? Like, when are we placing somebody like, you have to be this, 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 and in this manual versus taking some, self agency to be able to meet our own needs and really seeing our partner as somebody that is elevating us in a lot of ways, but not depending on them to meet our needs. So I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about that.
It's also really tricky. I'm trying to forget. I keep on citing books because, no one knows it all. You learn from coaching your clients, you come up with your own theories, but you also take in all this information. So this might have been 5 love languages or attached, one of the two.
Yeah.
The phrase, you're only as needy as your unmet needs.
Mm.
I love that.
Mm.
Right. So it's very easy, especially for men, to label women as needy.
Right.
Why do you think they're needy? What are you failing to give them? Right. And so that's where it's easy to say you should take care of your own needs. But if my need is I'm married to you and you work 12 hours a day and travel 20 weeks a year, you may be a great provider, but you're not a great husband.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And saying, well, she should just take up tennis doesn't really answer the question. Right.
Yeah.
They might be incompatible as a couple. We need to figure out what our needs are before we get married, not after.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yes, in marriage, you're 22 years, I'm 15 years. Those needs change over time. But I think in a good relationship, you ask your partner, you volunteer for your partner. At least I used to do this a lot. Honey, how could I do better? What do you need from me that I'm not doing right now? And you take the answer.
Yeah.
Right. I think it's the assumption of positive intent, right? Because there's that love. If sort of the old school definition of love is doing loving actions for someone over time. It's not the feeling and the tingly honeymoon. It's more like parental love. I love you, therefore I will do whatever it takes for you.
Yeah.
So if you have that kind of deep, foundational, unconditional love for a partner, then it's always 2 people going above and beyond to try to make the other person happy within the boundaries of reality. Right? It's not the golden rule, it's the platinum rule, right? Not keeping score. What can I do better? How can I make your life easier today?
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that question where it really comes back to ourselves of like, what can I do? Because I do think that a lot of times we can get stuck in this trap. And this might be where we, digress on our beliefs just a
Sure.
little bit. But I don't think that anybody is in charge of obviously our emotions, like our happiness. Like there's nobody else that's going to make me happy. Like I get to be in charge of my own happiness and my own emotional landscape. Like that is something that I deeply believe in. However, when we are in relationships, it is that level of respect of like, am I continuously asking myself, how can I show up in this relationship as a good partner out of love for this person, knowing that certain things, like, yes, we might be in charge of our own emotions, but to understand that at the base of humanity, we're of course going to impact and influence our partner's emotions at a very deep level because of the way that we're showing up in the relationship.
Yeah, I think it's pretty twisted because we can say simultaneously. I like
Yeah.
the both and two
Yeah.
things
Yeah.
simultaneously true. We are responsible for our own emotional state, and if we're with an abusive partner, to say I should just be cheery and carry on with the
Yeah.
abusive
Absolutely
behavior,
not that.
that doesn't really wash for people.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
So
Exactly.
that's why I look at everything sort of like a Venn diagram. There's his needs, there's her needs. The more those two things can overlap, the more successful the relationship. The more those things start to diverge, now we've got a
Right.
real relationship problem, whether it's marriage or dating.
Yeah.
If two people just don't have the same needs, even if they are attracted, even if they're nice, even if they like each other, you have to kind of be on the same path together.
Right.
Otherwise, all the love in the world won't fix it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's where I agree with that for sure. So let's start talking about sex a little bit. I saw on one of your, I don't know, maybe it was an Instagram reel or something like that. You said that one of the, contentious arguments you hear is who wants it more? Who, like, especially in the dating world, do men or women want it more? So what would you say to that? And really, how does that influence like the dating landscape, especially for women?
I think this is also a multivariate answer.
Yeah.
Um, my wife coined a phrase which I like and I use. Men look for sex and find love.
Mm.
In the
Mm.
process of trying to get laid,
Yeah.
right? Right. No one ever walked up to a woman at a bar because she looks like she's going to be a good mother or she's highly literate.
Yeah.
So men look for sex, and in the process of looking for sex, they're like, "Wow, she's pretty cool too."
Mm. Mhm.
Right? That and a lot of women don't understand that, right? Which again is not to say that women can't do the same thing, see a guy across from the bar, want to take him home. But in general, men are more likely to separate sex and love. It's why a guy is willing to sleep with you and never call you again, and women are less likely to engage in the same behavior. On the other hand, in marriage, I think that it's probably, I think I even read a study on this once upon a time, that there's almost no correlation between who loses their desire and their libido.
Mm.
And what 15% of marriages are sexless marriages. And there are women who want it 3 times a week and guys who are fine with once a month. And so I would defer to you in telling me what you see. But I think in marriage, once you're with the same person every day for the rest of your life, desire goes down and it doesn't resemble the first year and a half of dating.
Yeah. So let's talk kind of about that first year and a half. So what does that mean then if because I think that there is this narrative in a lot of women's minds, and I've coached a lot of women on, is like they only want sex from me, or they only, I'm being looked at like as an object of their pleasure, an object of their desire. And
I,
so when we have this narrative that that's what's happening, how do we create that trust or that safety in our nervous system to see that if it's anything more, or to even put ourselves in these situations that could be potentially harmful and at the least very vulnerable?
right. And I'm sensitive in talking to you as a sex expert
Yeah.
and not knowing, all of your theories. I don't want to push any of your buttons and say
Yeah.
anything that directly contradicts you because I respect you and I would defer to you. My theory
Hmm.
is starting with what we just talked about.
Hmm.
This gap in understanding,
Yeah.
right? That men and women biologically have some different needs. And so if we could explain, and I try to do that, it's not, a guy can want to get married and be a great husband and father,
Yeah.
I've always wanted to be that guy. Always, always. I wanted to be like my dad. Right. From 25 to 35, I got laid a lot. One thing doesn't negate the other one.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Right. I could sleep with someone for pleasure, don't want to hurt anybody. It was never the desire. Right. And I could do that to keep busy instead of being celibate. Right. But always, always wanted the real thing. So if we can at least understand that a man's desire for you in the first month has nothing to do with marriage. He may want to be married. He may not want to be married. You can't tell which guy he is.
Yeah.
Don't blame guys for being that way. Let's just say, okay, this is the way they are. I don't have to like it. I don't have to agree with it. Men are horny. They're going to pursue getting sex. They're going to say the right things. They're going to charm you. This is why I believe, and again, this is where it may be controversial. I don't think it's wise in general, unless you're cool with it, right? I'm as a liberated woman, I could sleep with whoever I want. If you're fine sleeping with a guy who never calls you again, go ahead and do the same behavior that men do.
Yeah.
If you're looking for a relationship, I would think you shouldn't sleep with a guy until you know that you both want a relationship together. And that might take 4 to 6 weeks, and that's okay.
Yeah.
So I'm not a hypocrite. Anybody can sleep with anybody, right? No judgment at all. I was a slut, no judgment.
Yeah.
Right. But if you are sick of guys sleeping with you and then not calling you and then you feeling used, don't let that happen anymore. You get to control that boundary. You can engage in foreplay and see how he treats you in between the dates. Does he do a platonic date? Does he take you to the ball game or the farmer's market? Does he offer to cook you breakfast the next morning? Does he follow up with a call every day or a text every day? Is he escalating as a boyfriend? Is he talking about a future? That's going to be a better indication than he takes me out to dinner. He's charming. He's funny. He's good in bed.
Yeah. I love that. I think it's really, again, it's an and, right? It's not either or, really understanding. I think what I'm hearing you say is what it is that you're really desiring. Like, of course, as empowered women, we can have sexual relationships whenever we want. Is that something that you're wanting? Is that something that you're craving? Or is it a deeper relationship with somebody, and looking out for some of those signs that you said of, am I getting indications that this person also wants a relationship, or does it feel more strictly physical?
Now, if you can't tell whether he's interested in sex or interested in you, don't have sex.
Yeah. Yeah. So what might be some of the key indicators for somebody to be able to find out?
It's what we just talked about. It's his willingness to follow up after the date quickly, to communicate frequently, to go from being the once a week date to being a twice a week date guy, to being the, hey, I want to introduce you to my friends, to, hey, we should take down our profile. Like there's an escalation that happens over the course of, again, made up 4 to 6 weeks, where a guy goes from, she's hot, I want to get laid, to like, oh, I think she's my girlfriend now. That's literally what I said to my wife.
Yeah.
We were hanging out for about 4 weeks, and we were sitting on the couch eating Chinese food, watching Arrested Development. And I was like,
oh, I love that show. I haven't thought about that show in
really,
so long.
But it was like, we'd gone from like kind of non-intercourse, like kind of hooking up, but I would go to her house to be physical, and then we'd talk for 3 hours. And suddenly we were like in this sort of big domestic place. I was like, I think you're my girlfriend. She goes, I think I'm your girlfriend.
Yeah.
And that was it.
Yeah.
Right. And it was really organic. And we didn't sleep together until we made that commitment to each other. And that was my rule. That wasn't hers. I decided after sleeping with people, it didn't feel good.
Yeah.
Right. So I would rather not sleep with someone and not be a jerk than to sleep with someone and then second guess it and bail afterwards. So the 2 years before I met my wife, I didn't sleep with anybody.
Yeah. Yeah. So then coming back to like needs, like how, and you can decide how you really want to answer this question. But some of the things, that I hear, I'm mostly coaching women as well, is like, I want to feel good. I want to experience pleasure. I also want this relationship, right? And how, like, in the meantime of like waiting and finding your person or going out on all these dates, should or like could somebody just deal with those like physical needs like that, that drive, that horniness, that feeling turned on, and not wanting to completely separate themselves from this experience that is really beautiful as humans, and also holding out for something that's really important to them?
Okay. Uh, Two answers.
Yeah.
I basically, in my Love You course, teach women to date as men date,
Mm-hmm.
right? To do exactly what I just talked about, to date multiple men at the same time,
Yeah.
and keep a wide funnel, keep your options open, see which intern wants the job the most, evaluate them over their performance over a month,
Yeah.
right? And to engage in foreplay like you were in high school,
Mm-hmm.
right? You can go around the bases, you can hang out on third base for a while. I make a line at intercourse. Different people have different judgments about whether that's a bigger deal than oral. There's not a right or wrong answer.
Yeah.
I think the idea is you could sample some physicality, which is what I did, right?
Yeah.
While you're looking for a partner,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you can have sex with a stranger or have a friend with benefits where there's absolutely no feelings involved, I have no moral judgment against it. The problem is feelings often get involved.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's the theory and there's the practice. If you can do what many men do, which is completely separate, men can sleep with women they're not attracted to. They can sleep with
Yeah.
women they don't even like. Most women don't like to sleep with men they're not attracted to and don't like.
Right. Right.
Right. So if you can, more power to you. A lot of women try to do that, and the next thing they know, they got a regular Friday night with their fuck buddy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And they're kind of hoping their fuck buddy calls them more, and they're kind of hoping he catches feelings for them. And now you put yourself in a bad place.
Yeah.
So that it requires self-knowledge, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Do
No, I love
do
that.
you agree, disagree? I mean, I'd love to know your opinion.
No, I totally agree. And I think, there is so many different ways that we can experience pleasure. And I think part of the key is like, what I think is so much of what we work on is like our mindset or how we're framing it. And I think that if we're framing it like I'm not getting it, or I'm not being fulfilled, or I'm not being taken care of, or I'm like this, pent up, I have no outlets or no pleasure, then of course it's going to feel confining. Of course it's going to feel like there isn't options. But when we see that there can be so many different ways that we can experience physical pleasure in our body with ourselves or with somebody else, it really can open the doors and kind of expand our mind so that we at least feel satiated and not like this desperate lack of like, I have to have this one thing in order to take care of my needs.
Sure.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, I love it. So another question about just like this beginning and this chemistry, and you're having like this sexual tension, or you're having this flirtiness, so there's a lot of fun there. How do you see that there transitions to being beyond the chemistry, allowing it to be really a sustainable relationship? Because you said, there's these emotions that come involved, there's these indications we're taking a look at. So what is it, or how would you say that chemistry can really be a part of us getting engaged in a relationship, but shouldn't be relied upon to like keep that relationship going?
You can go to Wikipedia and scroll down look up the word love, and
Mm,
you scroll down to the biological basis of love, and it
mm,
cites a bunch of research, notably the research of Helen Fisher, and it talks about love in three phases. The first phase is lust,
mm-hmm.
an initial walking across a bar to someone.
Yeah.
Right? The next phase is attraction, which is
Mm-hmm.
lust individualized. That's usually the dating phase. That's the 18 to 36 months where you're kind of on cloud nine and the person could do no wrong, and you're high highs, low lows,
Yep.
dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine. And then the
Yep.
last phase is attachment. It's when
Mm,
all the chemicals go away and you're like, oh, I'm really attracted to a jerk.
mm-hmm.
So we give a lot of power to the first two phases, and we seem to forget about the third phase.
Right.
So
Right.
chemistry, a measure of chemistry, doesn't have to be white hot chemistry. I
Yeah.
tell my clients, if there's a six could go to a nine, a three
Yeah.
can't go to anything.
Right.
So if there's a baseline of chemistry, explore it. If there's none, no reason to even go on a second date.
Right. Right.
Right? So we need chemistry to start a relationship. That's the match. Chemistry alone won't sustain a relationship,
Mm-hmm.
a good relationship. In a bad relationship, in a good relationship, sex is the cherry on top of the sundae. In a
Mm-hmm.
bad relationship, sex is the sundae.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yeah.
that's all you got.
That's all it is. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So we need to have a baseline of it. He has to be good giving in bed, has to have a baseline form of attraction, but chemistry alone cannot sustain a relationship because we talked about character, kindness, consistency, communication. Good sex will mask that, but it won't fix that.
Yeah.
What do you
I,
think?
I totally agree. And I love those words, the mask versus fix, because I think that really is key. I think even in these very toxic relationships, you can have, wild, pleasurable sex that can make it very confusing. But if that's the only time you're feeling connected, if that's the only time that you're feeling, really in a relationship with somebody is during that physicality, that's really an indicator of what else might be like not available or available to you in a relationship. So,
Mm.
yeah. Yeah. I love it. Okay. So, last question. I love to ask all of my guests this question. So, we didn't get too much into talking about the pleasure for women, but just from the fact that you are a dating coach for women and you believe that they deserve love and these high value men and all of those sorts of things, when you think about pleasured women, like how do you think the world would change if more women were pleasured and satisfied and fulfilled?
Gosh, it's a really interesting question. And it's one I've never been asked before. So forgive me if
Mhm.
I fumfer around for a couple
No,
seconds.
yeah. Yeah.
Is it sad to say I think it's almost unfathomable to contemplate that?
Yeah.
I'm a I, I try to represent, what I would hope good men would be, and I don't try to put myself on a pedestal. I would also say that women's life experience matters a lot, and if you listen to women, they'll tell you 90% of men are not capable of being the man you want them to be.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
I don't argue with them. If you tell me that 90% of men are not capable of being that man, I believe you. Now we have a dating pool of 10% of men. You only need one. So there's hope for
Yep.
everybody.
Yep.
Let everybody waste their time on the 90%. But I think there's a lot of guys who are incapable of it. But it's almost like a Marianne Williamson type thing. Just imagine a world that was more driven by love,
Yeah.
right? I mean, everybody would be softer, everybody would be more collaborative, everybody would just be kinder.
Yeah.
They joke about, people the day after they get laid, they got a smile on their face and everybody's a little bit more relaxed. But it goes past the getting laid. And I know you know that as a
Yeah.
sex therapist. It's really more the emotional caretaking.
Yeah.
And you talked about, mental labor, emotional labor. That's why, again, my North Star as a coach is making sure that no matter what you get, no matter what your partner is, you find a guy who makes you feel safe, heard, and understood,
Yeah.
which for me is another way of saying pleasured.
Pleasure. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And I do. I think it is sad that we kind of think it's like almost unfathomable because it hasn't been represented, there hasn't been representation of that. But it's such a beautiful thing, I think, to think about too, and really uh as a driver for so many women, because I think sometimes looking beyond our own needs or just like I just because I want to feel good, but when we really think of like what the world would look like as a movement, when we give ourselves permission
Mhm.
to feel good, when we give ourselves permission to pursue pleasure and relationships that matter and are not settling, that it's not just us that get to feel good, but really the ripple effect of that collaboration, that connection, that kindness, what that's being passed down to our children of it's so much bigger than just us wanting that, but also giving ourselves permission than that. It's not a selfish thing at all. It's really a world changing thing.
Yeah, and you could only do it on a micro level. So
Yeah.
whatever you created in your 22-year marriage, what you're creating out in the world, what you're passing on to the people who listen to you, passing on to if you have a family, there is a ripple effect. But you got to sort of zoom in and zoom out. You could like
Yep.
look at the world and be it's crazy and chaotic, and then in my house I could create a little oasis of happiness.
Yeah. Yeah. A safe place, a safe landing place. Okay, I love it. Thank you so much for this conversation. So tell the listeners out in the world if they'd love to hear more about your work, your book, your all of the things that you have to offer. Share a little bit about that with
Sure.
us.
My name is Evan Mark Katz, EvanMarckKatz.com. I'm a dating and relationship coach for smart, successful women who have everything but the man. Um, I have a podcast called the Love You Podcast. My signature course is also called Love You. You can find me on every social media platform. If you want a free gift today, I made something special for you. If you go to evanmarkkatz.com/my pleasure, you can download my 25-page ebook, 7 Massive Mistakes You're Making in Dating. They're probably things that you never actually thought were mistakes. So it'll make you think a little bit. And then you'll be on my mailing list and I'll send you free dating advice. And if you ever decide that you need more support, you can come to me, go to evanmarkkatz.com, apply to coaching with Love You. And I'll do my best to take care of you.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you so, so much. Okay, have a good one. And as always, it's been my absolute pleasure to share this conversation with you. Hope that you reach out to Evan if you would like to learn more about dating in this modern world that we're in. Take care until next time.